Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.
Hello, and welcome to Champion Psychology, a show with the goal of openly talking about mental health and gaming presented by Codename Entertainment and TakeThis.org. Once again, we have a little bit of a different episode this week. Look, there's still only two of us, but now it's a different two of us. With me this week is Mitra Jordan. Mitra, how are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Yeah?
I'm doing great. I'm wearing a sparkly necklace in Dr. B's honor because, you don't want to take over the tiara.
It's true.
It says tiara. No co-opting of tiaras around here, although he wouldn't care really.
I think he'd be happier if all of us had tiaras, yeah.
I think so. That's true. But we can't do that without him. So here we are doing a show without Dr. B, and we miss him. But we're going to be talking about us and me.
Yeah. Well, before that, in case people don't know who you are, who are you for the fine folks who may not know?
Absolutely. So I am a therapist in Victoria, British Columbia. I'm a clinical counselor. I work with all kinds of folks. I do a lot of marriage and family counseling. And I happen to also have ADHD.
Indeed you do. That is a common thread through this show.
Definitely. You're not allowed on the show if you don't have ADHD. Did you guys know that?
The thing is, though, I do think that the majority of people we have had on this show do have ADHD. Last week, Dr. B was talking about his recent diagnosis and all that stuff and how he's been navigating it. And since he's not here this week and you're here this week, we thought that would be a great time to talk about your ADHD and your journey with it, because you do have a very unique view on it, not just because Dr. B and I are cis white dudes with beards who have never really gone anywhere, but because you have experienced ADHD in multiple cultures and whatnot. So I'm just gonna pass it over to you to start wherever you'd like with that.
It sounds good. So yes, my story is one of many tangents and interruptions. I mean, that's such a surprise.
Actually, I already have an interruption because I forgot to say it. We're going to do the second part of this show as a questionnaire like we did last week with Dr. B, so be sure to put your questions in there for Mitra, and after the disclaimer, we'll be answering those questions. So question, : and then your question.
Okay. So you are, of course, allowed here without ADHD. We're really glad to have you all here today to kind of take part in this, because you will be taking part, particularly in the second half. But yeah, what I want to talk about is the experience of migration and experiencing, I guess, myself as someone with ADHD in various cultural contexts, especially since the entire time my ADHD was undiagnosed. So we go back to I was born in England, but I grew up in Pakistan. I was in Iran shortly before the revolution. Luckily, I wasn't there during that time. I was in England periodically as a child. There were a couple of points, one in particular where I also went to school and spent some time there. And then eventually I was in Canada at the age of 16. So there was an awful lot of interruption in my, I guess, academic experience, and also to friends, and also to place. That is to say, the place I called home would change. And it's kind of hard to have a sense of home when all of this is going on. And so it's kind of hard to have a sense of stability. And for kids, stability is important. And for a kid with ADHD, it kind of is actually extra important, particularly in terms of our experience with education and our own sense of ourselves as learners. And yes, I think tangents and interruptions would be an excellent. I had a story of my life, okay? So, all right, and stuff I haven't ever talked about actually, because I didn't see it in the context of ADHD.
Mhm.
I saw it more in the context of I'm failing as a student,
Yeah.
or I'm not smart, or I let people down all the time,
Mhm.
right? This mostly related to procrastination and my sense of time. But let's start at the beginning. So you got the picture, kind of all over the place growing up, but in my early years, I was being raised by my grandparents in Pakistan, which was a lot safer. And I would say kind of actually more welcoming and multicultural. It had a fairly robust expat community from all over the place. People were excited to kind of be building this new country because the break with India came in 1947, and the years after that were kind of dealing with trauma and then rebuilding. But by the time I was a young child in the 70s, it was much more about um, let's be kind of as in some ways open to new ideas and new ways of doing things. And the school I went to for even a part of my high school experience was at this one school, was also kind of very British. It had been around since 1847, and it was a grammar school.
Mhm.
And it was, I guess, really very traditional in how it saw students. So on one hand, you've got kind of more openness culturally, and on the other hand, you have these traditions, this one in particular, kind of from the British Raj. And so
Mm.
it was kind of very, there was a certain way to be and do things, and there was a certain way to learn, which was actually a big part of South Asian identity. There's very specific ways to learn, and they involve sit down and shut up,
Yeah.
memorize. Don't ask too many questions. The teacher will tell you all. It's kind of that, which, super not conducive to ADHD learners in the least. But so first I went to a Montessori, and all I really remember is using scissors and having a good time, and generally not running with them, I will add, but generally kind of it wasn't, and I felt good. I also got a fair amount of stimulation at home because I had a young aunt who was 17 and who read to me and did things with me. And I
Mhm.
was reading by the age of 4.
Mhm.
All of this makes one feel quite smart, you know.
Yeah.
Um, I started kindergarten. It was all fine. I felt super smart. Every time you finished a reader, you went to the principal's office to turn it in and get the next level up and get congratulated. So it all felt pretty great. So at this point, no issues with I'm not particularly hyperactive. My ADHD is mostly inattentive and impulsive. I was definitely bouncy as a child and
Mm.
didn't like sitting still a
I'm
ton,
literally sitting here with a fidget toy.
right? I'm going to have my cup of tea, which on the inside of the mug, it says, not all who wander are lost. And I feel that really, I feel that. Mm. Anyway, so far so good, as you can tell. But um, I think the problems really started when we did have to do more sitting down.
Mhm.
And we were kind of expected to sit still and listen. So little children usually, have a lot of activities in kindergarten. I remember our kindergarten was probably more similar to the Montessori than it wasn't. So there was a lot of go off to those brightly colored blocks,
Yeah.
or go pick up, you could kind of explore and move around. But when we stopped being able to do that was, I think, when the problems started,
Mhm.
and when I couldn't focus on doing the things I was clearly good at or felt confident at, like I could read and I liked art and stuff. But I had to then learn math. And I remember trying to learn my times table. And I remember actually struggling a little bit with the 5 times table until I clued in that you could say 5, 10, 15, 25, 30. Then I felt like I was cheating.
Yeah.
So it was just kind of, these are moments that sort of really stood out in terms of something's not right in some ways, right? But it wasn't anything anyone was picking up. And it became much bigger as time went on, where I really did struggle a lot with math. And where there was a particular letter that my grandfather sent to my mother, where he said, Mitra is content to sink to the bottom of the class.
Oh.
Yeah. And I remember feeling that wasn't true at all.
Yeah.
It was nothing to do with that. It's just that I had no idea how to stop it,
Yeah.
how to change it, or how to effectively learn, because as I think most kids will try to resist the things that they find hard, particularly if they're really smart in other areas, and it doesn't make sense why one thing is so much tougher. It's like, but reading and all of this stuff came so easily. I'm smart. Something is wrong because this is so hard. I'm dumb. And then how do you hold both those things as a child when no one's sitting you down and saying, oh, look, it's actually not that. It's actually some things are harder to learn than other things. And also you have ADHD, which no one knew.
Yeah.
So all that was kind of percolating and not going super well. And then my grandparents separated, and off I went with my grandmother to Iran, where much of her family lived. And there was no school for a while. And I had to entertain myself. And I was reading The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings at the age of 9 and rereading them because I didn't have a ton of books around. And it was all fine. But of course, I was falling behind. So when things finally settled down and I was back to the same school as previous, I was back to Pakistan eventually. I did go to school in Canada for a bit, and I did quite well. And I was a little bit shocked. The expectations educationally in each place that you live, it turns out, are very different. Whether you talk in class or whether you're told to sit down and shut up. In my school, boys got to ask more questions. This is in Pakistan. Boys got to ask more questions and were given much more of a slack. So if they interrupted, if they were more, if they sort of were louder, they were allowed to be. But if a girl did that, if a girl behaved identically to one of the boys in the classroom, and I use girl and boy because, of course, nobody was talking about non-binary people at this point. But there was definitely a difference in the expectation. And so if what was happening for you is you were fairly quiet, you were excelling in English and art like I was, and you even, as long as history was interesting, did quite well, nobody was really paying attention to what was going wrong.
Yeah.
And I think that's still true to quite a degree today. I think this is why women end up having undiagnosed ADHD or ASD even, because they're not showing the symptoms or behaviors that we typically have identified as ADHD. So I was forgetful. I found it really hard to do my homework. I found it really difficult, obviously, to focus on things that were tough.
Yeah.
And all of this meant that you focus just fine on the things that you enjoy. What is wrong with you?
Yeah.
Right? So we've all kind of, I think lots of people with ADHD have similar experiences there, but the sense of judgment around not behaving right, around being slightly more outgoing or impulsive or interrupting or having a little bit of trouble sitting still, because, we can be ADHD and have a small H, but maybe we still have some H, right?
Yeah.
So it was just all of that ended up leading me to feel like I could not learn.
Yeah.
So to that end, I have my high school report book.
That's so wild.
Let's see. So in junior school, there's Mitra should not find class 7 work too hard for her, provided she settles down to work. She will have to go over class 6 maths work, otherwise she will find it rather tough going into the next class. So at this point, I'd kind of come back to the school, and now they were just kind of making a note of things. But you'll note that there's an awful lot of, she really needs to apply herself.
Yeah.
Anyway, we get to a lot of blank pages, and then senior school. And Mitra has not produced good exam results. In her, God, his writing is tiny and I'm old. One sec. Mitra has not produced good exam results compared to her term work, which was promising. She must strive for a better position next term, which she is capable of. And then so each teacher then had a little bit where they kind of wrote in their stuff and gave you a grade. We got D, we got C, we got 3 E's. That would be history, elementary maths, and geography. Elementary maths, pay attention in class. Must work harder. Disappointing exam. Should be more patient when painting. I got a D in art.
My
Horrible.
Lord.
Her work, so more patient. And French, a cheerful student who works with interest. But that French teacher was really trying, let's be clear. So next term, we've got, she must improve. She ought to work harder. She'll find it more difficult. If she doesn't, needs to work, must work harder, needs to take an interest, pay more attention, lot of hard work needed, disappointed, capable of better work. Guys,
Yeah.
I was 12 years old at this time.
Jeez.
There was nothing encouraging presented to me.
Capable of better work. It's such like a backhanded thing. Ugh.
And let's talk briefly about migration. So at
Yeah.
12, I had come back from Iran, then being in England, then being in Canada for about 6 months. There was a lot of family turmoil. When I came back to Pakistan, it was without my grandmother. It was a different household because, and it was my grandfather and I and a couple of aunts who kind of were helping out in the house and doing things and also getting housed because it's not super easy for young single women in Pakistan. So didn't have anyone to really take me in hand. My grandfather sort of shook his head and content to fall to the bottom of the class. He was lovely and I was grateful for the school, but I don't think, understandably, he wasn't a trained teacher. Did get me a tutor at one point. So there was effort, but it wasn't getting to the root of any of this.
Yeah.
None of the teachers were taking into account possible family turmoil. There was no discussion whatsoever. There was no such thing as counseling for a kid at that point. So there was no, oh my God, you have been through so much. So now, if we go forward a year and a half, my grandmother dies far away from me. She's kind of, a significant mother figure in my life. And so there was an awful lot of trauma and turmoil going on there. There's a reason I became a therapist. You kind of look at why do people do things the way they do, what happens in families, what's going on in all those dynamics. So none of this was being taken into account in the school system. I think I had one teacher who kind of asked what was going on.
Yeah.
And that was because I was starting to find even my favorite subjects where I was generally had done quite well. I was starting to find those really difficult also. I was starting to fall apart, really. So again, going forward, we get, again, steady effort needed. Here's one that I think really kind of highlights what it's like with ADHD from the outside. Mitra lives in a world of her own. She's highly imaginative, and her composition exercises are a pleasure to correct. However, she must get down to learning and studying other subjects which are a part of the course of studies. And I think this is where you see what we have always experienced, is that the confusion from not just ourselves, but from those around us that like, oh, but you're so capable here.
Yep.
Why are you not able to focus on this other material? And so my grades didn't improve, of course. And so, so I got D's and I got, I think, 1 B in English and a C+ in art, but really things were pretty tough. So it didn't really get better. And so I think my sense of shame increased. And I didn't have anyone really to sort of teach me how to study. So what started to happen is as the years went on in terms of high school, you're expected to do so much more written work.
Yeah.
Of course, there's more homework as well. This was a very academically focused school. There was a lot in terms of papers and just material you had to get through. I had no issue with any of the reading, but in terms of actually writing, I procrastinated so much and I had a really terrible time. And there was a little bit of light when I first came to Canada because I felt seen for the first time in terms of my interest and my curiosity in
Mm,
school. Um, and that actually gave me some momentum in terms of doing written work as well. But the problems really started when I started university and in my first degree. Um, so we're going to briefly look at that because I think it's super relevant to
yeah,
people with
absolutely.
ADHD as well. So when you're in high school and you're in classes that have maybe 30 students, and some of them were even smaller because not everyone wants to do AP geography or whatever, right? So you end up doing classwork which kind of is leading to university. And I remember the first problem was actually a geography a geography class that I had where I actually really was looking forward to writing the assignment.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, at that time, nothing was on computers. You were writing it out by hand.
Yeah.
And my best friend was whiteout because because every time, everything I was writing, every second word I wanted to correct, everything I second guessed, right? And I think this is kind of related to episodes where we've talked about the tyranny of the blank page, or we've
Yeah.
talked about um, how you kind of scare yourself into, on one hand, the grandiose language of I can do it all and I'm amazing, and the you're a flop, you're a failure, you can't do anything, and you've kind of got this stuff blaring at you.
Mm-hmm.
It often feels like. So I started to have trouble there. But then my first year of university was actually tiny because it was a new program where they started you off in January. And I don't think York University does this anymore, but we had 30 students in our class. And it was lovely. And I could get through the work and feel pretty good about it.
Mm-hmm.
And there was enough novelty. Let's not forget how important novelty is to learning if you have ADHD.
Yeah.
So because it was all different and because it was finally courses I could love, like humanities and history and art, and I could throw myself into it and I got through. But my second year was like a bucket of cold water. It was 400 students in a large lecture hall. Nobody really cares whether you do the work or
Yeah.
not. And I really limped through. Um, and I was terrified of failing, and I nearly failed.
Mm.
The following year, I had a couple of courses where I still remember one of the professors took me aside and said, "Look, I hear you in class. You're brilliant. What is going on?" And I thought, yeah, I feel brilliant in your class. But in the class, it's like right there,
Yeah.
especially if it's a smaller class where you can have really exciting discussions,
Yeah.
where you can engage. And my sense of time is basically now and somewhere off to the sides, the past and the future and all the rest of it. So really planning my workout was very difficult. So it was easy in the moment to come up with things, but then trying to juggle work and paying the rent and just all of the things that kind of take us away from
Yeah.
ourselves. I found myself pulling all-nighters, and that was the only way I could get work done because your feet are to the fire. We've
The
talked about
I think one of the most horrifying college memories I have is cranking out a paper that was due the next day, and I was in the middle of the last paragraph and my computer died.
oh God.
And then it came back up. The entire file was corrupt, and I had to try and sit there and remember what I had written. And
So
it
brutal.
was, and I turned in the next day. I'm just like, yeah, it's probably crap. I'm not, yeah.
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 Yeah. It's so discouraging.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that internalized, I am not a good student, was really, really strong for
Yeah.
a very long time. At the end of that year, I got debarred. And this is the thing I've actually never talked about.
Mm.
Um, I told everyone that I just needed to take a year off.
Oh,
I told everyone, oh, it's just all a bit much and I need to save money. And
yeah.
I was so ashamed of getting debarred. And it hadn't occurred to me that if I was having problems, I could just maybe go talk to people.
Yeah.
Because in my family, because of the various challenges we'd gone through, you couldn't actually talk to people. And in my previous experience with school, I felt super judged, right? Because I wasn't. So I just figured there wasn't any point in
Mm,
talking to people. It wasn't going to get me anywhere. It wasn't going to, no one would listen with sympathy because obviously I was the problem.
yeah.
So these are the ways in which I think we really do, unfortunately, contribute to not getting help in ourselves, is this belief that, well, we've already failed and it's our fault.
Yeah.
The internalized piece is strong, and just recognizing actually it's not you. It's neurodiversity, which of course is a part of you, but requires us to deal with it differently instead of blaming ourselves.
Hmm.
And the lateness was absolutely an issue in all areas of my life. I'm sure I lost friends due to it. In fact, I know I did. I know
Hmm.
I've lost jobs due to it.
Hmm.
And I had to really find a way to work with it so that I was showing up on time. But it was probably much more, I think, it was much more difficult because I don't have an internal sense of time.
Time. What a. I hate it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
So,
go ahead. Go ahead.
no, no, please.
The thing about time and ADHD, like, there's this weird vivid memory I have from like a Christmas when I was a child, and like my stocking had this candy bar in it, and I just wanted to devour that candy bar. My mom was like, "No, you can't eat it all in one sitting. You're just gonna get a massive sugar high. You gotta spread it out. You can eat half of it now, and you can eat the other half of it at 10:45." And this is I think this is the first time that I actually registered what time was on a clock, because I sat there watching it, and I swear to God, that half hour is still going on. It was so long. It was just the most excruciating half hour of my life.
Absolutely. Yeah.
uh, it,
Yeah.
it just goes on forever, or it doesn't happen at all. It's I don't know how to explain ADHD in time. It's wild.
Yeah. It really is. And I think the part of the challenge is some people do have a really good internal sense of time.
Yeah, the
I
wizards.
I have developed one around certain things. I cooked professionally. You have to have a sense of
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
And that was fine because it had a rhythm of its own, and enough experience and experimentation made it work, you know. But in general, it's something I have had to very consciously work at. Figure things out on a calendar, really sort out. So I think in the end, with that particular degree, um, I got through it. But I have to say, when I started my second undergraduate degree, it was with a lot of trepidation and a lot of fear of who I was as a student. But because I was able to focus on it so much more, and because I did have a partner at that point, my now husband, who has an excellent sense of time and planning, and I think by that point, some of that was starting to rub off on me. And I could also chat to him about it. But I had also by that point accepted that these are some of the pitfalls I'm going to deal with. I still didn't understand I had ADHD, by
Yeah,
the way. I got through my master's not understanding I had
that
ADHD
is
as well, with
wild.
3 little children that I had to also somehow manage.
Wow.
Yeah,
I didn't know that. Wow. That is absolutely wild.
yeah,
When did you find out that you had ADHD?
about 6 years ago.
Really?
Yeah,
I didn't realize it was
very
wow.
late diagnosis.
Yeah.
Things started to make so much more sense. What also happened, and I see this actually with female clients often, is that we start to go through perimenopause, late 40s. Um, and that actually does make it more difficult to remember things and stay focused. And so it kind of, your ADHD basically doubles down.
Oh jeez.
So all of those tools which kind of worked and got
Yeah.
you through before really don't
Yeah,
now.
it's fighting back.
Yes.
Yeah.
Plus, you might be dealing with a little bit of anxiety and depression, which is
Yeah.
very, very common when your hormones shift. And so it's just that much harder. And so I remember actually it was because of my kids and looking at them and sort of going, I wonder what I'm seeing here. And one of the teachers sort of discussing possible ADHD with one of them, and I thought, this is really familiar. I think, maybe I'm dealing with it too. The funny thing about this is many years before, I had gone to see a therapist and we worked together for a little while. And I was describing some of my challenges with my mother, whom I adore, but who hasn't always raised me. And
Mm-hmm.
so we had a complicated relationship for a while. And she said, "Do you think your mother has ADHD?"
Mm.
Okay, so two things. One, try hard not to diagnose a party that isn't actually in the room. But I could see where she was coming from. And at that point, ADHD was all fresh and new, and everybody was thinking everybody had it, Um, but it's interesting because I looked at some of the descriptors that at the time were really popular, and I couldn't see myself in it. I couldn't really see my mother in it. But now, looking at it from a what's it like for a woman to have ADHD lens,
Yeah.
my mom 100% recognizes she had ADHD. I have ADHD. Two of my three kids at least have it. And so, yeah, it's very much a part of our lives now. And we have much better strategies to cope with it, me included. But I just want to point out that even if I had thought I had ADHD back then, I doubt very much that there would have been any support
Yeah.
in terms of any appreciation that indeed was going on.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Uh, the thing about the parents possibly having it whatnot made me think of my best friend's family because my best friend has ADHD, and it was always funny as a kid, or not as a kid, but like later into my college years and stuff. Of being over there and the parents would just be like, I just I don't understand how he has ADHD. I don't know where that came from. And then I'd watch them do stuff and I'd go, yep, no idea.
Yeah.
Not a clue. Mm-mm.
Yeah. Yeah. So much of behavior gets normalized that we don't really see
Yeah.
that maybe there is something, right? And
Yeah.
I honestly, I think I kind of want to normalize neurodiversity because the more time passes, the more we recognize that there are more people than we thought that are potentially ASD.
Yeah.
There are many more people that are ADHD. Maybe it's not so rare after all, right?
Yeah,
So,
Dr. B was saying something like I think and Dr. B, you're in the chat, so you can tell me if I'm wrong. Something like I think he said 9% of the population has ADHD or something like that. Which I mean, 9% of billions of people is a lot of people. But yeah. Oh, yeah. Now he said at 9%. Ha! I remembered something. Be proud of me. Uh,
nice. That's a really great question that Dr. B is asking.
well,
Um,
let's take a quick break and remind our viewers of our disclaimer, and then we'll get back to some questions. Remember, chat, you can also get your questions in here. Put question colon and then your question in there. That's not directed specifically at the person who's in chat whose name is question colon. That is fantastic, by the way. But we're gonna take a quick break to remind you of our disclaimer, and we'll be back to answer your questions. Bye bye.
Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.
Okay, let's see what Chad has been up to. We're gonna start with, and I know I've pronounced your name before, and you told me how to pronounce it, and I don't remember. I think it's Sharke. I think it's Sharke 51 or 151. Sorry if it's not. Question: the number of I gotta say this. The qualifier at the end of this is fantastic. But they say, question: the number of people being diagnosed with ADHD and neural divergencies seems to be increasing. Is that because we understand more, or is it because other factors are causing these differences? Parentheses, not the vaccine BS, of course. I absolutely loved that parentheses so much.
Thank you for that parenthesis so much. Yeah. Okay. I really, not being a statistician, or really my wheelhouse isn't exactly that area, but I'll do my best. I think we do understand a lot more about ADHD. I think I think more people are asking about their own behavior and how it might be related to ADHD. I also think that unfortunately there starts to be this worry about distraction and how our screens are distracting and technology is distracting, and I don't think that's at all helpful for the ADHD conversation. It is, I don't think it's, I mean, unless you live out in a cabin in the woods without anything, there's always going to be distraction. And in my experience, I grew up before there was really a lot of technology.
Yeah.
I grew up in a household that didn't have a TV till I was 8. There was no screen time.
Yeah.
There was, actually there was very little TV, because if I remember, there was maybe 5 minutes of cartoons. We didn't get like an hour or two of Saturday morning cartoons or anything.
Yeah.
So I didn't have any of those distractions people are worrying about now. And I can't speak for everyone, of course, but I can tell you, I was still highly distractible. And I was still also able to really bring in that laser beam hyperfocus.
Yeah.
I could play quietly with something for hours and hours, and I absolutely hated the interruption of dinner. I wasn't that interested in food back then. And I hated being interrupted if I was in hyperfocus. Who doesn't? So no, I don't think that it's fair to sort of blame current increases in ADHD to the fact that people go on about just how many distractions there are.
Yeah.
There are always distractions.
Yeah.
Pick up a book, want to pick up another. Get a phone call, want to talk to a friend. Play with this, do that. My own projects and interests.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to do some art. Oh, but I want to read. It was always that way.
No, I think it does come down more to that we have more of an understanding and more of a possibility to catch these things, that I think it's always been there and whatnot. There's some, I don't know the legitimacy of them or anything, but I've heard about studies going through and looking at why ADHD developed for some reasons in the brain and whatnot. It's interesting, but again, I don't know the legitimacy of it. But yeah, no, it like the whole, again, like it I haven't met someone who it just popped out of nowhere, where like no one related to them had ADHD. I've yet to see that. I'm sure it probably happens, but I like, as soon as I find out that someone has it and then later on I meet their parents or something, I'm like, nope, I see. I get you. I'm here.
I do want go on.
No, go ahead. Go.
I was just going to say, the one thing that I meant to mention is that a close friend of mine who also absolutely knows I have ADHD said, "Oh, but you didn't have too hard of a time with your ADHD at one point." And I realized this is not her fault in the least.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a woman who's watched me raise 3 kids, do my master's, right? I'm functioning pretty well. And it really got me thinking about the cost of that functioning. And also the previous stuff I told you about, the homework that was never done, all of the stuff I had such a tough time with in school, and failing out of university that first time and all of that. So I think it's really easy to not see it in another person, and not understand, therefore, that when someone tells you that they think they have ADHD, that they do know themselves.
Yeah.
That there's stuff they've been masking.
Yeah. No, 100%. One of the things that I find so interesting is that, like, a lot of my friends have been figuring out that they have ADHD. And the funny things that I've been noticing kind of in my own thing is that like ADHD people definitely and people with ASD so like kind of migrate together, like they end up forming a group and whatnot. And so
Mhm.
like it's funny to me, like one of my friends, I make it a habit. I don't, if I think someone has ADHD, I don't say anything because that's not my place or anything like that. And I don't want to give them a sudden panic attack or anything. And one of my friends for the longest time have been like, I think he's got ADHD. I'm pretty sure he does. And then literally a couple of weeks ago, we're talking while playing a game. He was like, "Oh yeah, I was diagnosed with that when I was a teenager." And in my head, I'm like, "I fucking knew it."
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Okay, I realize we gotta get through a few more of these. The Dr. B, who could that be? Question: do you find value in being transparent at all with clients regarding your own struggles?
Oh, that's a really tough one actually, because it can backfire. And I
Mm,
think at one point it may well have, because sometimes clients may then think you have a bias towards seeing or not seeing certain things, or towards excusing certain things they don't want to excuse.
mm-hmm.
So I I can be quite tender with clients and sort of help them try to kind of have some self-compassion for their experiences. But if they're judging themselves harshly, they might feel like, oh, she has ADHD too, so she's kind of biased and telling me it should be okay when it's not. It's not actually what I'm saying. But
Okay.
so I find, unfortunately, at times it can interfere in the dialogue between the client and me, and in their own dialogue around therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And at other times it is very useful,
Yeah. Okay.
because I'm I think that it can help a client know, particularly if they're younger. This, I think, is the difference. If I'm working with a youth or a teenager and they're dealing with it, it gives them the sense that, oh, no, you know what? I can still be academic. I can still learn and I
Oh.
can still have success in my life. This isn't the end of the world, right? But if I'm talking to someone who is sometimes if it's a couple and one has ADHD and the other doesn't, it can be incredibly useful, or it can feel to the person who doesn't have ADHD that I'm siding with their partner. So there's really, in me, there's kind of a judgment call. I mean, if anybody comes across, YouTube or Twitter or anything, they'll know
Mm-hmm.
pretty quickly. But in terms of bringing it into the session, I'm really cautious. I'm quite transparent. I'm
Mm-hmm.
willing at times to self-disclose, but I'm also really careful about, what does the client need to know?
Yeah.
What's going to benefit them in therapy? So,
I like that.
mhm.
Well, thank you, the Dr. B, for asking that question. This is Pendler. I'm gonna go with Pendler. Question: is there some correlation between ADHD and people with degrees?
I don't have
Yeah,
any
I
idea.
don't know. I could see like
Yeah.
if you get the hyper focus in there for long enough, I could see that working out. But yeah, I don't know if there's anything specifically that does
Yeah.
anything
I
with that.
mean, I can tell you there's definitely a similarity of experience that people have if they're ADHD and they're also learners,
Mm-hmm.
and they might be struggling with their identity as learners because of the ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a pretty common one. We often end up talking about what it was like when we were in school or some of the challenges we've had, just as I did today. Um, but in terms of how you manage that, your learning experience, and whether you go on to have a degree, I
Yeah.
couldn't tell you.
Okay. We're gonna go to none own underscore that says question. As someone who struggles with their ADHD and specifically hyper focuses in parentheses hyperfocusi, I like that one. Hyperfocusi is it's a fun one. Do you have any tips on how to deal with a certain sadness that comes along with losing your interest in something once your hyper focus moves on?
Oh God, yeah. Yeah. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, for me, my hyper focus on things has sometimes been a refuge.
Yeah.
So I get that, right? If I'm obsessing over something that I want to buy or that I want to do, and it's kind of a nice place for my brain to go when I'm busy dealing with other things. So yeah, when that hyper focus comes to an end, like what helps me is like I try to have more than one source, I guess.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
a number of things I like doing, for example, so that there is the inevitable day where I don't feel like knitting anymore, but maybe I'd like to sew, or maybe there's a book I'm reading, or I can go see a friend. So I think having multiple sources of resources anyway, right? And hyper focus certainly falls into the category of it can be a really positive resource, and it can also be destructive, right?
Hmm.
And if it's destructive, sometimes we just have to also put a stop to it. And yes, that does bring on a kind of grief. But having multiple safe, good places for your brain to land, and rest and enjoy and replenish, whatever that means, is important.
Yeah. No, I know this feeling so well of just like being so excited for like a new video game to come out, and you get that you dive in and the hyper focus is just flying, and then you sit down with that game one day and it doesn't do it anymore. and
Yeah.
and and, and I hate those days because it's the one where I like end up sitting there on the PlayStation store endlessly, like I know there's a game that I feel that I want to play but I don't know what it is. And that sucks. But
Yeah.
I do agree with like trying to have multiple things going on at a time, of like almost trying to separate hyper focuses into hyper focus. I really do like that, into different
Hyperfoci.
hyperfoci, yeah, into different medias, where it's like, this is my video game hyper focus, this is my book hyper focus, and stuff like that. And I try to do that in this really weird way where like I don't let myself, like it's a weird complicated method that I have in my head of essentially not letting myself have a hyper focus when I feel it's happening, because it's either that like, okay, I could feel myself getting there but that's not what I want to do right now, I'm gonna not let myself hyper focus on that, so that when that comes around again, like recently it was with Resident Evil 8 came out, and I was like, I think if I played it I would really get into it, but that's not my hyper focus right now, so I'm gonna put that off.
Mm-hmm.
And then recently I super hyper focused on Resident Evil, played through a bunch of the games, and I had 8 there waiting for me to play, and so I got to like have this like super deep dive into it and everything, and it was extra great.
Yeah, and I love that because what you did, it seems like you also created space for it,
Yeah.
so that you had, the luxury of kind of enjoying it. Because I think one of the most difficult aspects of hyperfocus can be when it feels like it's a runaway train.
Yeah.
We're on it. It's 2 a.m. We have to be up at 7, but here we are,
Yeah.
and I've been there enough times in my life to know that nothing really good will come of this. And yet somehow there can be times where it really feels like we're powerless, sorry, to stop it.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
Yeah.
Right. So we really kind of want to create healthy spaces to enjoy whatever it is we want to dive into,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Um,
They always sneak up in there. You watch the
they,
wrong YouTube video once and you're
yeah.
like, oh no, this is my next 3 weeks.
Yeah. No, so one for me, I have recently, now that there's less responsibilities in other ways, and kids are older and all that, I really got back into sewing, which I love. And I wanted to kind of find a way to enjoy it where it wasn't taking over. So sometimes I'll sit down with a bit of hand sewing or mending or something, and it's fun, but I can also do it while watching a show or whatever, but it doesn't take over everything, which, a good weekend of no interruption and getting to really play with fabric is fantastic. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be up at 2 a.m. when
Yeah.
I have to be
Yeah.
like, so it's trying to recognize, okay, I need boundaries around this that are going to work for me and be healthy and still allow me to take pleasure in things, so that shame doesn't get connected with it. oh, now, you can't do this thing without like going into, so you want to be able to kind of enjoy those things without them becoming destructive.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we are getting towards the end of the show here. Mitra, thank you so much for talking with us today. I was telling Mitra during the disclaimer that I realized I wasn't talking because I was just completely enthralled with what she was saying. So very much thank you for talking about this and disclosing all this. It was really great to hear.
Thank you for listening. Yeah.
Any last thoughts that you want to add here at the end?
Well, I think that one of the hardest things we deal with ADHD is struggling with that internal shame. So I really want to encourage you to consider that we have to find these positive ways of working with our own experience, whether it be the joy sometimes of hyperfocus, or even just the challenges of being on time, or any of that stuff. It's gotten better for me, but I still struggle with it. But it's not, this is something we're working with.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't want to get into letting that self-doubt and shame ruin our experience of the other piece, which is we get to be so present as people. That's one of the beauties of not having a great sense of time, is we're here and now. And that is a gift. The creativity that sometimes we experience is also a gift. So I'm not saying woo superpower, but I am saying let's just work with who we are. Yeah.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Well, yeah, I think that is gonna do it for this episode. Mitra, if people wanted to find you on the interwebs, where could they do so?
I'm on Twitter, and I'm also at mitrajordan.com. Yeah. I respond a little slowly on Twitter, but I do. So if you want to reach out to me there, please do feel free. And my Twitter handle, of course, is below.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at the Treavor. There's an A hiding in there. Yeah, I think that is it for this episode. Thank you so much to Jordan and Mars for moderating the chat and doing a fantastic job. Thank you to everyone in chat for joining us today, and thank you to Codename Entertainment and Take This for letting us have these conversations. Let's see. I think we got a regular schedule for the rest of the week going forward. So be sure to check out Reddit, Discord, and Twitter for those schedules. But that's gonna do it for this week's episode. So until next week, when I go to find the button so that I can actually click away from here at the right time, take care of yourself.
Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.